Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. I'm Liz Farrell. I'm the Artistic Director of Painting, Drawing, and Printmaking here. Welcome to our summer faculty lecture series. And before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones. I'm going to do the same. And I also want to remind everyone about our orientation tomorrow morning, 8:45 right here. And you'll meet your faculty again, and then we'll head off to the studios. So if you can be here at 8:45, that would be wonderful. I'm going to be introducing two wonderful faculty tonight. We're going to hear from each of them, and then we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. And they'll be seated in these chairs. So hold your questions till the end, and then we'll do a little bit of that. I'm going to get started. So it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Joanne Lee. Originally from South Korea, Joanne received her BFA from New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University with a concentration in ceramics in 2015. After graduation, she moved back to South Korea for an artist-in-residence program at the Korea Ceramics Foundation, Icheon Surapia. Probably pronounced that wrong. She completed an MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art in 2019 and achieved the Franz Rising Star Project Scholarship, Outstanding Performance in Porcelain Design in that same year. After graduating, she finished her residency at Sonoma Ceramics in Sonoma, California. In 2021, Joanne taught numerous ceramics courses for various levels at the James Madison University in Harrisburg, Virginia. She is currently ceramics coordinator at Anderson Ranch Arts Center. So let's give her a hand and welcome her to the stage.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my name is Joanne Seongweon Lee. I just got my name changed legally this year because I got my citizenship of United States. So yeah, that's my full name. But today with my talk, I'm going to start way back to 2009. That's the year, that was my high school year, and that's when my ceramics career began. So this is my work during the high school time, and my high school actually had a very nice facility for ceramics. So when my high school knew that I was gonna go for school for ceramics, they allowed me to stay there until late at night working independent work for myself to get ready for my portfolio. And it was really nice, and they even provide all the clay for me and did all the firing for me so that I could be really focused on my career. And then on my graduation year of 2011, I just entered this. I entered this really big biennial in Korea, which is called Gyeonggi International Ceramics Biennial, and I was honored to achieve third prize as a youngest artist ever to enter and win a prize there. So this work is actually in Korea right now as a collection at the Korea Ceramics Foundation. And after I graduated, I actually went to Syracuse for our first year and then transferred to Alfred University since sophomore year. And these are my BFA work, BFA thesis work that I'm going to be showing. And during those times, I was very focused on doing material experimentation, especially for translucent porcelains. And it took about full 2 years to get my own recipe done and get testings done. And this was my first testing. It was not quite done yet during this time. It was my junior year. And I tried to get some thickness into the translucent porcelain clay because some of the translucent porcelain need to have those really thinness into it, and which I really did not want to have because it's going to get really hard to work with. So for my porcelain, I tried to make a porcelain where I could achieve some thickness into it while getting some more translucency. And for my senior year thesis, I was able to make these slab works. It's pretty thick. It's thicker than you see on the photos, but I was able to achieve what I wanted for my translucent porcelains. And I actually put a glaze on the back of the slab, and then when the light is going through, you could see the picture of what I draw on the porcelain. And I was studying under John Gill at Alfred, so he actually made me experiment with other materials as well, something called tape casting. And tape castings are usually used in engineering. So I was actually a double major in engineering with Alfred time. So I had access to an engineering building. So I was able to get some tips and getting some, introduction to tape casting from those engineering professors. And these tape castings are actually mixed of porcelain slip with Elmer's glue and glycerin. And it's been grinded in for 24 hours, and then I used it as a slip. And it does not dry at all. It actually stays wet, and it actually it does dry, but it doesn't get completely bone dry. So I still have it. This is a 2015 work, so it's been 7 years. It's still not dried at all. Yep. And it feels like actually human skin, and you could peel it off, and then if you fire it in a kiln, it actually goes thinner than a paper. So it's pretty nice material to use. And after my BFA, I went back to Korea, and I got accepted as an artist in resident at Korea Ceramics Foundation, where I got a third place at. And this place, there were two different programs in this residency. One was where it's artist in resident, where they have to pay a monthly fee to use the facility. Where I it was a program. I get a stipend, but it's a project where they call it a ceramic mix project. It's not ceramic mix project. It's a ceramic mixed project, and what it meant was that you need to make a ceramic work, but I have to collaborate with other medium artists during those 2 years of residency time. So for my first couple months, I collaborated with one of the fiber artists in there and to make a chair. And so I made the frame of the chairs, and then she'll be putting some fibers and everything like that in there. And it was this was actually my first time collaborating with other artists, so it's getting there, I think. And then the second project was I made a shelf, and I'll be working with the woodwork artist to make a frame for me. And it slides out, so you can mount a wood piece first, and then I could slide in the rest of the work sideways. So there's a joint. And in that ceramics program, they also had a glass artist. So we had like a glass blowing area, and there was more glass artists. There was about like 3 to 4 glass artists. So I was able to collaborate with her to make a martini in wine glasses with ceramics included. And I also worked with paper. For the paper, these are just a prototype, and then I'll be actually using those prototype to pour a plaster on it. And it's it is quite a difficult process because plaster has water in it, and then paper will suck out the water, so it will ruin the prototype. So what I have to do is put a lot of shellac on it so that it could be waterproof. And I was able to make these series on the wall with the resin for my work. Before I came back to United States, Korea Ceramics Foundation also called me again during the summertime because they were doing another international ceramics biennial. And for that year, for the first time, they brought all the past medalists into Korea to do a workshop. So there will be about 10 artists who becomes mentors, and then there will be 30 mentees. So each artist get 3 mentees for their workshop. And these were the group photos that we had. Yep. And this was Christine Coste from France, who did a lot of performing art at the stage with clay. And this is a video, and this is one of the mentees' work, and doing a lot of traditional foot wedging on the floor. It's a long process. It took about 30 minutes to get that. Yep. And he is Hyang Jung-oh from Korean artist. He's very famous ongi potter in Korea. And for his workshop, he'll be doing a coiling work, and they'll be doing the coiling work for 3 full weeks. So these are only works they've been working on for full 3 weeks. And we never fired it. He never wanted to fire it. We let it dry and then completely break it on the last day of the workshop. And they actually use about 7 to 10 tons of clay for this project. Yep, and they'll be keep on going, building. And then the last picture is this, is the end of the coiling process. And we got Torbjørn Kubasbo from Norway, and Yamada Hiroyuki from Japan. His workshop was very interesting because in Korean we call radish mu, and in Korean we also call nothingness mu. So he was making a radish, and then it dissolves into water, becomes nothing. And he wanted to talk about the value of the artwork in this current world. And after those workshop, I went to MFA in Cranbrook, and I did some photographs with one of my friends. He was a photographer who came to study ceramics for his master's. He took a lot of my work to take photos in Cranbrook area, and we did some collaboration with the photos, which was really fun. Yep. And during this time, I also threw a lot of pottery. During the Cranbrook time, I did a lot of repetitive forms. I'll be throwing same thing over and over again. And I just love throwing same thing over and over again. I don't know why. It just made me do it. It calmed me down a lot too. And it was like a very meditative process for me. And it also gave me something to think about, how I could display my work. Instead of putting one work on a pedestal, I will start to think about how I could display my work in a multiple situation. So I've been like throwing completely, going crazy with throwing. Yep. And for my displays, this was my first display that I tried during Cranbrook time, and this was because I went to Alfred, and their kiln situation was a little different from other schools. So this was what I remember, how I remembered in that kiln when I just opened up the kiln, how my work will look like. So that's how I displayed my work. And then this was one of my other work. It is a mini moon jars, and at this time I was missing my own country, so I was like, maybe I could kind of tribute my work to my home country. So I made about 150 mini moon jars and made those shelves, and then kind of tried to figure out how I could display it. And I felt like the grid system worked really well with my work, so I made all of that. And each moon jars has a different sizes, different decoration. Nothing is all same. And for my MFA thesis, I made another installation, and using acrylic panels. Actually, it kind of all my projects. It actually gave people to opportunity to come closer to look at it because it has some details in it. While if you put a work on a pedestal, it kind of gives this block. It kind of makes the work kind of distance to the artwork from the people. So I tried to kind of test around how I could bring the people into my work where they could kind of see closer to my work. So, and the acrylic panel actually kind of gave a lot of details with my drawing lines, a lot of reflections, and everything like that. And after graduating, I went to Sonoma, California, and it was one of the beautiful places I ever been to. And I did an arts and residence program for 6 months in this building, and they provided apartments. So I was staying in this building 24/7. So when everyone is gone, then I'll be going around all the room in that center so that I could just sneak in and try everything out when they. It was pretty fun. And during this time, I also did a lot of multiple works. I did a lot of more of Sonoma type of work because Sonoma was like a wine country, so I made a lot of wine glasses and everything like that. And I also this was my first solo show there, and I did a lot of I worked with only 2 types of clay, which was a porcelain and a black mountain clay, and that's why we called our title a 2-tone show. And I also did a display like this where I could just install it inside of my big pot with the installation of a small pot in there. After Sonoma Ceramics, I decided to stay there because I really loved the environment. It was very beautiful, so I tried to stay there. And I got hired as a office assistant, event support assistant, and then an instructor for their community members. After first 2 weeks of working, because of a pandemic, I got laid off, and then everything got shut off. So I was in a lockdown. And one of the board member at Sonoma actually let me borrow their the cottage to stay in during the pandemic time. And I had to find some things to do in that cottage because I could not bring a wheel into their house. So I had to try to figure out what I could do during those pandemic time. And this is where I worked for the first time in the house. It was a corner of the kitchen in that cottage, and I started to just coil. I just kept on coiling because that was the only thing I could do during those time. And at first, I really didn't like it because I was more of a wheel thrower instead of a hand builder. But as I did it more, I started to love it more because I could control every situation, like thickness, the weight and everything like that, and the shape, much more better than I used to do with the wheel throwing. And this was the first work that I really loved because of the line qualities, especially the coil lines. And after this point, I just sticked with the coiling. After this was my last work at the Sonoma, and I had to drive back to Virginia to my mom's house so that we could stay close together. And this was my first studio in my mom's house, so I didn't have any kilns or anything like that, so I'll be just making work. For the first 6 months, I'll be just making work, not being able to fire anything. So this is, I think, how I make my work. Kevin? So during this time, I've been making a lot of videos of me working because that was one of my way to communicate with the audience. So I just tried to make a lot of videos while I work, and I think the coiling actually made me more represent me more better than the wheels right now. So, and then the other video. Oh wait, this one too. So everything, all the process is done in one day. I do not stop and divide into 2 different days or 3 different days, because when I try to do that in 2 different days, the coil quality gets changed because of my emotion, how my days go. It just looks different. So I try to stay in one day to finish my work. Sometimes it takes from 30 minutes to 12 hours to finish my work. And this is because I did not have a kiln. I had to drive my work to get best. So this was my way of driving my work. So none of them were actually fires. So they were greenware. So bone dry work in a seat belt. The good thing is none of them broke. I never broke anything. Sometimes I had to drive 1 hour to get to a bisque area, the kiln area, but nothing broke. So I think I'm good at driving and packing on my work, it seems like. And then after the first year in 2021, last year, yeah. I got hired at James Madison University as a sabbatical replacement. I was a sole department head there for a year. So I had to move to a third home in Virginia, in Harrisonburg, and this was also my permanent studio. And during this time, I also taught about 180 students, doing about 7 to 9 classes, different levels, and they made about 2,000 works around that year, I think. And this was really, really, really fun time to do it. And during that time, I tried to make different shapes of my coiling works. And this is called a prunus face that I made during those Harrisonburg time. It was pretty fun because I usually, for my coiling work, I usually made moon jars usually, but I tried to do something else, and I think it's nice. And I think this work was in the staff show also this year here at the Anderson Ranch, and it's pretty nice to do it. I don't have a lot of a photograph of my work of this current state because I'm still testing with glazing, firing situation, everything like that. But for now, what I usually do with these works were I usually fire everything in 4.5 hours so that it doesn't give any of my clay have any time to move around during the firing. Because if I stayed in the same like a regular firing schedule, it usually warps and collapses because my work is about 1/8 of an inch thick. So, and I'm using porcelain, so it actually makes it much more fragile. So I talked to my former professor at Alfred, and he told me to just fire everything really fast. He actually recommended me to go about 800 Fahrenheit per hour, but I could not do that because that was too fast. So I went about 650 Fahrenheit per hour, and that's about 4.5 hours to go up to my temperature. And that actually saved a lot of my work. It did not even move around a lot. And right now I'm testing with some of the surface with the atmospheric firing because now I have access to all the wood kilns and soda kilns and everything like that. So now during my time here at Anderson Ranch, I'll be firing a lot of different kind of surface atmospheric firing to do my work. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Joanne. We're so glad to have you at Anderson Ranch. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Alleghany Meadows. Alleghany received his BA from Pitzer College in Claremont, California, and his MFA from Alfred University. He studied with Takashi Nakazato in Karatsu, Japan, received a Watson Fellowship for a year field study of potters in Nepal, and was an artist in residence at Anderson Ranch. He has presented lectures, workshops, and been a visiting artist at art centers and universities nationally and internationally, including Penland, Alfred, Kansas City Art Institute, RISD, Archie Bray, Haystack, and UGA Cortona in Cortona, Italy. He exhibits widely and is the founder of Artstream Nomadic Gallery and the Studio for Arts and Works, SAW. His work is in numerous public and private collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Long Beach Museum of Art, and the Huntington Museum of Art in West Virginia, where he was honored with the Walter Gropius Master Award. Please join me in welcoming Alleghany Meadows.
Thanks, Joanne. That was really great to see your work. And thanks, everybody. I am going to do slightly biographical as well, and it's great to have that parallel of first finding ceramics in high school. I think that's such a potent time to be able to work with arts, and especially things like clay that are responsive. So this is me kind of searching for meaning in life and finding wet clay. I went to my third year of undergraduate. I was able to study under Takashi Nakazato, who's been here at the ranch for many years in Karatsu, Japan. And I just fell in love with the process of taking this pliable material and subjecting it to sort of geologic processes. Similar to what Joanne talked about with repetition as an apprentice in Japan, it was all about training your hands, my hands, to have the muscle memory to repeat something over and over again. I wasn't there for the full amount of time, the 3 to 5 years. I was only there for a year, that a traditional apprentice would have been. But it affected me greatly. Prior to this, my work was sculptural, and I was in college in Southern California studying with Paul Soldner, and it was sort of an anything goes, which is amazing. But what happened in Japan is that I fell deeply in love with utilitarian work. Everything in Takashi's house was made by himself, or this is his son at that time. And the attention to detail of how the work interacted with the seasons and with the individual types of food that would be in season. Like there was a certain bowl shape that was only used when the bamboo shoots were about 4 inches high. And I came back to undergraduate in Claremont and chose to just make utilitarian pottery. And that's been since '93, that's been my focus, almost 30 years. For my thesis show in undergraduate, I made all the dishes, and this relates to the workshop I'm doing here in a great way, made all the dishes and replaced them in a cafe so that people who came to eat, they actually had to experience my art. I was challenging myself, trying to figure out, as a maker, how do you find an audience? How do you get your work somewhere where people are, sort of forced into it? And the response was incredible. Some people would really pay attention and notice, and some people, it was just a fleeting moment and they would be gone. As a completion of the thesis went for a month because I wanted to really sit, and I would just silently observe and people using my dishes. They wouldn't necessarily know that I was the one who made what they were eating off of. But for the final, I made another set of dishes, and there were 30 people that were faculty and family and friends who came to a very specific meal. And in exchange for coming, they needed to bring a story, a song, or a poem to share with the group. And they received all the dishes that they used as a gift. years later, on a move across the country, unpacking a box of pots, the plate next, that's me on the left, your left. The plate that I was using was the first thing to come out of this box, and when I held it, I remembered sorry, I'm on the far right. The gentleman who's cut off on the far left for you with the long gray beard, his name was Carl Hertel. And so me, years later, picking up this plate, Carl's passed away. The thing that happened was I remembered so vividly him standing up and singing, filling the space with a song of this Irish folk song from his heritage. And what I started to realize is that the pottery has this ability, my work, or any type of work that we live with and experience with, it actually starts to record these memories, and they become a patina on the work. And rather than the work being this final fired complete piece, it's actually changing over time because of our perceptions. So what was a final moment of coming out of the kiln actually was only the beginning of its life. I received a fellowship, Watson Foundation fellowship, to go to Nepal for a year. So from LA, I went to Nepal, sort of searching for the unknown craftsman. And I found in this village near India, potters who dig their clay out of the riverbed during the dry season. And they work on these large discs that are made of clay and straw, making water jars that are required in the hot summer in Nepal and India. If you don't have a pottery water jar, you don't have cold water, because the pottery perspires and evaporative cooling keeps the water cold. So these are the equivalent to needing a paper cup here, to be able to get a to-go cup. There's something amazing to me about pottery finding a culture where pottery was required rather than a choice. And I'm used to a culture here where somebody might choose a piece, but it's sort of sorry, I'm losing the word for it. It's a luxury item. The women decorate the work, and she's using her toe. For the pottery students in here, her toe is the banding wheel underneath. So incredible use of technology that's gone on for thousands of years. Everything that is put into the pottery is the same materials that the houses are built with. So the clay and the straw, and in this case, the dung on the ground behind is used as fuel, but it's also, when it's wet, it's mixed with clay and it's used to plaster the outsides of the houses. So these are everybody in the village makes the same work. Nobody wants to stand out and be different, which is very different than art school here in the States. The pots are traded for their equal volume in rice. So while I was there, I met Anderson Ranch used to run field workshops to Nepal. And I was able to help assist and set up some logistics because I spoke the language and was living in a village. And so I met Doug Casebeer and a group of artists from all over the States and found out more about Anderson Ranch. I knew about it because my undergrad teacher was Paul Soldner, but I was lucky enough to become a resident here. And so I came from Kathmandu to Snowmass Village and tried to understand what in the world was going on. Exploring material, trying to figure out what it is for me, how it would respond to my touch, looking at the log structures and at nature, working with textures in kilns and then cutting apart pieces and assembling them together with other textures and movement. After being at the ranch for 2 years, I went to Alfred for graduate school and was sort of quite everything. A good graduate program really forces somebody to question everything they think they assume. And those questions pushed me sort of deeper into the utility side for a while, where I fell in love with the way that things in my hand, the form that I would hold. And in the workshop, we'll explore handles and things like that, and then over the next week. I also fell deeply in love with coffee. So one morning, after staying up all night in the studio, I unloaded a kiln and pulled a cup out and went to the coffee shop and then sat on these steps. And I was holding a cup and had a relatively profound, sort of lightning strike moment where I realized that the clay was this pliable, responsive material that absorbed and responded to my ideas and my intentions. And then once it was fired, my hand became the pliable, responsive material, and I had to respond to the intention of the fired piece. And, it still feels profound to me, even though when I try to explain it to my children, they're like, yeah, Dad, you fired it. It got hard. But I think in the life of a maker and of an artist and working with a certain material for a long time, there become these sort of potential thresholds of deeper understanding. So I explore in my studio small cups often. I feel like I could never exhaust the possibilities through my entire life. And I set up assignments for myself where usually they involve my espresso machine and a certain volume and ratio between the coffee and the milk, or now I found out I'm allergic to dairy, so now it's oat milk and all those different things. But I set up these assignments and these sort of questions about pattern or texture or volume or weight or form. And then I came across a sandblasting cabinet at a workshop I was teaching at the Archie Bray Foundation and started to take away the shiny surfaces and to age pieces and to change the surface in a really different way. And similar to Joanne, I'm really in love with repetition. And there's something incredibly gratifying and rewarding to filling a studio with work. And the subtle variations. When I was in graduate school, I was exposed to a book called The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abrams. And in there he describes bird tracks on wet sand, how they are always bird tracks, but they never repeat themselves. And for me, I'm inspired by nature, but I'm not going to copy or try to illustrate an aspen leaf. I'm going to try to illustrate the way the branch underneath the leaf might grow differently and move in the wind. I love making dishes, and I love knowing that my dishes can be used in somebody's home day in and day out. And I think that at one point I did the math on how many meals, 3 times a day, 365 days a year, over 45 years, 50 years. That is a lot of opportunity for my work to interact with somebody. I'm also acutely aware that it can break in an instant. And so there's wonderful potential. If a piece breaks, it actually, like pottery lives a nervous existence. And when it's clay, it's totally relaxed. It's just dirt. It's living in the earth. And then I do, potters, people do all of this work to it and imbue it with meaning, imbue it with form. And then if it breaks, it actually gets to go back to dirt and relax again. These are some photographs by Carl Blossfeld, sort of some inspiration that I use in thinking about dishes, thinking about pouring forms and pitchers, looking for tension, the balance and tension. Some mixing bowls. This is a Bruegel painting called The Wedding Feast, and in the lower right-hand corner is a basket full of cups. And that basket inspired a series, and I loved seeing Joanne's as well, where this contrast between dark clay and porcelain. These were in graduate school, 99, I think I finished. So this was in my thesis show, and it's sort of a still life after that Bruegel painting, where thinking about how can the pots be fully relaxed but also sit on your kitchen counter, and you get to choose which one you want to use that night. And so there were series where the cups were all very similar to each other, and then there were others where every cup was very different. And then getting ready for an exhibition, we were taking the Airstream, which I'll talk about in a minute, to New York, and there was very little space inside of an Airstream trailer that turned into a gallery. And I was making these sets of bowls that would display on the counter like sunflower petals. And I started stacking them into the larger bowl, and they connected up. And that series has evolved for a number of years, where these dishes can nest into something else and become a sculpture when they're not in use, but then they can come out and be used as dishes. So on your left are some various carrier-type forms that hold, in this case, a double set of plates and bowls. This is an exhibition I had at Sam Harvey's gallery pre-COVID, I believe. No, I can't remember when it was. I think it was 2 years ago. So how dishes can start to feel like flowers. I was able to teach in Italy, and I tried to learn how to make pinch pots. In all of my life and working with clay, I hadn't slowed down enough to actually pinch and build form. And some of the things that happened from that were falling in love with the fingerprint and the directness of force. So on this bowl set at the bottom of the screen, those are my fingerprint on wheel-thrown pottery, both making it asymmetrical and also when I was in Tuscany, I was on a hike on a Roman road, and I saw a pottery shard. And a Roman road is actually, stones that go up into the middle of the forest. But it's been thousands of years that it was used. And I found this pottery shard, and there was a potter's fingerprint in the terra sigillata, and it just took me back in time to the exact moment, because I knew what that felt like to touch clay, that exact moment when that other person from such a different time and culture had touched that piece of clay. So this workshop, I'm working with a chef. His name's Barclay Dodge, and he has an amazing, very small restaurant in Aspen. And he and I have been working together for about 5 years. He found me. I sold my work at the Aspen Farmers Market for 20 years, and he came across me one day and was, his arms were overloaded with vegetables that he was buying, and he had to set them all down. And he fell in love with the work. And so we've been collaborating. He's been pushing my comfort zone and giving me challenges, and I do the same to him. These are just some examples from his social media of my work and use. And 2 years ago, my work with him inspired teaching a workshop here where he presents us with a menu, and myself and the students, we react to that menu, and we make pieces, some that are sort of to show off his presentation, and some that might challenge him. And he loves that process where he gets challenged as well. So I'm just going to read one description. He sent me the menu, and I'll present it to the class tomorrow. It's a 5-course meal, and I'm having a hard time choosing which one of these descriptions, so I'm going to pick the 4th one. A piece of roasted duck breast is served alongside a blackened, charred, burned on the outside onion, revealing a tender roasted interior that is dressed with duck garum and duck cracklings. The duck breast is sauced, and a small cluster of grapes and a powder of black onion ash garnish the plate. So as a maker, I'm really fascinated by, I've looked at art history, I've looked at all these different things for source and for inspiration. And now to take this, what to me feels like a poem, and interpret that and think about like, wow, what is black onion garnish, ash, gonna, like, what is that gonna do? And what kind of vessel or what kind of form, what kind of glaze, what kind of size? There's so many possibilities. And we get to do this. And then we get to eat this menu. We can't eat our pottery, but he is a chef who gathers things from the forest and from the fields around our valley. Not everything, obviously, but like in a certain time of year, he'll go out and pick leaves. Or above this, on your right, these are river rocks. And he'll often put rocks on my plates and put them on the table, and then he'll serve things on top of the rocks. It's really inspiring. So on the left are some dishes I made that are about 6 inches across for him, little oval bowls. And here is a photo of one of those in use. And these are serviceberry. He uses branches. One of the courses we're going to have, he's using oak branches from the forest and putting something on them and then sort of burning those over charcoal. These are a few inspiration pieces where, sorry, I don't want to go too far. Okay. COVID released me from the farmer's market in Aspen. Every summer for 20 years, I worked every Saturday. And so I never had a weekend. I didn't know what it was like to actually take a long vacation with my children in the summer. And then COVID canceled that. And I went on a river trip for 7 days in the desert. And I thought, oh my God, I am never going back. And I tend to obsess over things. So last year, I rode about 700 miles on rivers, including getting a permit for the Grand Canyon in October and putting a trip together in 5 days. I was determined to go, and luckily my wife, Jill, was incredibly supportive, and she did call it my 50th birthday, even though that was this year. But to be able to dive deep into something that I just fell in love with. So this is limestone geology and going back millions and millions of years and floating every day for 21 days through this phenomenal, phenomenal area of the world. And then translating and interpreting some of those experiences into the cup on your left. Geology and time. I think perhaps one of the greatest not inspirations, but goals that I have as a maker is to affect the pace of time in a day for the user. So if I can make something that when somebody holds it, they stop and they might look deeper into it, that is incredibly successful. I love the idea of affecting that experience of a day. And here's some newer cups that are sandblasted, sort of echoing the different geologies. So I just want to briefly talk about a couple projects because as makers, many of us also do things to influence and affect and make the field and make our culture and society maybe better. Years ago, this group on your right of 6 of us, I started the art stream, and this was our first exhibition, and everybody participated. It was definitely more of a collaborative, but at the end of the day, I was the one who had to pay the bills. And we toured all over the country. This was in front of MoMA. We got a permit to film a documentary, and the city of New York blocked off the street and let us park there. This is at the Aspen Farmers Market. It's basically a 1967 Airstream turned into a nomadic exhibition space. A great way as a young artist to be able to exhibit your work is to actually just start a gallery. A patron of ours wanted to celebrate our 10th anniversary and made this as a cake, so we actually got to eat the Airstream. The pots in it are marzipan, so we ate the pottery. And then I was teaching with Mark Ferris at a workshop and watching the way that he would cut apart tar paper and tape it together to build volumetric form. And I asked him if he would design an Airstream that would print flat and everybody could cut it apart and make their own little art stream. And then it had a baby. I worked with an artist named Del Harrow who teaches at Fort Collins at Colorado State, and his design class I took this small Airstream down and I was sort of the client, and his design class got to make maquettes and figure out the interior shelving and how it could flow and work with the art stream. And then we remodeled the old original one. I finally realized it was not going to go down the road again, so we remodeled another one from 1965. And this one is currently in Carbondale, and it's been parked during COVID, but I've pretty much passed on the project to two young artists, Brooke Cashin and Justin D'Onofrio, and they're running the art stream out of Fort Collins, and they're planning to take it on the road through the Midwest this next March. So Sam, Harvey, and I started the Harvey Meadows Gallery in 2004 and showed work by artists that we loved here in Aspen. And I was a part of it for 15 years and then had the realization that I wasn't going to drive into Aspen again during a snowstorm over Christmas week and spend 2 hours on the road. And so I told Sam I needed to step away and good luck, have fun, it's yours. We had an amazing time showing everything from emerging artists to our heroes of the 20th century, from Sam Maloof furniture to Peter Volkus to Robert Brinker, cut out works on paper. Betty Woodman had a solo show in the gallery. And that table in the image a few ago, she used to display her work. And it was also used for dinners and for sculpture and pottery. We did performance pieces. Here's Terry Allen doing a series of prints in front of the gallery. I'm going to bring this project up for the workshop. This is a lending library of cups. During the economic downturn in 2009, a group of us decided to start a lending library that wasn't based on economics. And it didn't cost anything to borrow a cup. So I'll figure out a place to set it up. And you're welcome to come check out a cup. Each one of these, it's sort of cataloged the way a book lending library with a card catalog would have been before the electronics. So there's actually a stamp, and we have a typewriter. We have a checkout card. And the exchange for borrowing it is you have to submit a picture of the cup in use. Here's a librarian at University of Texas, Austin, in the geology department who checked out this cup from Elizabeth Robinson and submitted that photo. This is digital humor. Old Faithful. The library spent a month at the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana, so it got some outdoor wilderness. Here's a cup by Lisa Orr, a potter who used to be in Austin, whose work resembles rainbows, and there's a rainbow coming out. And then I think this is the last little project. Years ago, an architect friend and I wanted to help bring community together and bring artists together, so we were able to pull together funds to purchase a building in Carbondale and turn it into art studios. It's called SAW, which is Studio for Arts and Works. And there are 25 artists working in this building, including my studio is in here now as well. It's amazing to try to sort of recreate the vitality and the pulse of graduate school, basically, rather than all of us working in our own individual spaces. There's some amazing collaborations and energy that comes together, from community potlucks to open houses. And my kids would shoot me if they knew I was still showing this picture because they're a lot older than this. The middle child is Lily, and she's 23. And my wife, Jill, on the right, I guess we're free-range parents. When you bury your kids in mud and leave them by the river. But it's an amazing process. Thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you. So Alleghany, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how failure comes into your work, or perhaps how it might be part of your process, and then maybe how you, and this could be to both of you, how you sort of ward off cynicism through art making.
Thanks, Liz. I think if failure wasn't a part of my process, I wouldn't grow and learn at all. I would really stagnate and probably stop being an artist. You know, I think for me, the relationship between that challenge and struggle to bring whatever my idea or my emotion that I want to express into the work is ripe for failure. And it actually, I almost failed my first ceramics class. And it's an incredibly hard medium, and that's why I love it, is that the material and the process itself, I strive to control, and I never can. No matter how much. It's always teaching me something else. And I'll jump to the next, or do you want to answer that question too? I think you probably have a great relationship with that as well.
I mean, I did fail a lot of times, but I think failure also, I think I never thought my work, if I failed something, I never thought of it as a failure. I always thought of it as an opportunity for something else, because I think many other people also kind of felt like this. During the COVID time, for me, it was a failing time for me. I never thought that I'll be stopped in one point where I cannot really think about the future because of uncertainty. But I think during those times also gave me opportunity to kind of produce new type of work that completely was different from what I used to do. So I don't know, failure, I think failure was, to overcome the failure, I think it's just how I need to think about it, how I need to think it could be opportunity instead of an actual failure. Because if I think it was a failure, then it's going to be always a failure, I think. So, yeah. What was the second question? Cynicism. What is cynicism?
Maybe the optimistic, maybe a better way to put that is the optimism that is encompassed by art making.
I mean, things have really shifted over the last 2.5 years. And for me, I found lots of ways and moments and places, from rivers to gardening to studio, to find incredible optimism in humanity and in myself. At dinner, we were talking about, I was talking about a cup that for the last few months has kept my attention. And I think, though it's those sort of physical daily things that keep optimism and cynicism at check. I think overly optimistic kind of have to come back down from, and overly cynicism can be sort of really deflating. But art making for me, when I am able to get into that, my creative process in the studio, sort of all of those other things, I become very energized, and all of those other layers of what's going on in our world sort of melt away.
This is for Alleghany. If you're setting out to make a set of dinnerware, how do you balance how do you deal with the tension between the form that you are striving for and the fact that these have to function as dinnerware? Where do you place the emphasis on these have to work, or these have to have a particular form?
So my work, almost always, I want it to be non-challenging. I make it for our culture. I want it to sit, we eat at a table, so I want it to sit on the table. I want it to function on a counter, in a cupboard. I think about all of those parameters. It's like a door handle. The door handle needs to function in many different ways. But if I were to make door handles, I would have so much fun with texture and form and the response people are going to have when they hold it. But it's still going to function to open that door and close that door. And it's very similar with dishes. And I said almost always because the nesting sets they're actually massively contradictory. Like the photos of them are these somewhat beautiful images of this object of beauty, at least in my eye, that's what I'm trying to make. And the object itself is really beautiful, but when someone goes to use it, it can be really nerve-wracking because they're fragile and they can break. And if one of them breaks, the piece is, in their eye, may be ruined, or maybe it's changed. So that's that little spot of not everything I make is, like, I would love for it to be comfortable and non-challenging, but there's that reality of pottery. Yeah. But we'll get into more in the workshop as far as how much coffee to drink to make a set of plates.
Both of you are very much involved with the material. It's really kind of very interesting, and I'm looking for the word, but when I teach, I tell students there are three things necessary to make something, and it's the concept, it's the process, and it's the material, and you have to bring all three to bear on the making. And you're talking about failure and so forth. That's learning. And what we have to do is get over our Calvinist idea that failure is an end in itself. That really failure is only an opportunity to learn something. And when you fail, you should examine why it failed so that you can understand what you can do next time.
Beautifully said.
Hi, thank you both for sharing. Great talks. This question is actually for both of you because both of you mentioned, either as a phase or as an integral part of your work, the stage of repetition or the idea of repetition. How important would you say is that to your process, and how important would you think that would be for a young artist or an emerging artist, specifically in clay, but in any medium? The process of repetition, because Alleghany, you were saying you stayed for a year, but there were interns in the place that you went who stayed for 3 to 5 years doing the same shapes over and over, kind of the muscle memory. And Joanne, you were saying you also had, stages of doing things over and over and over again. I'm guessing, there's the therapeutic aspect of it and all that. But how important would you say that process of repetition is to a ceramics artist or any artist in particular, or in general?
Maybe you should answer that first.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't think repetition is important for any art at all. I think working with material is important. I think committing to work with something, there are artists very frequently over the last decade who might have been working with painting and then they're discovering clay. And so they're coming into this making incredible work that is not, where they don't have the sort of 10,000 hours of experience to, quote, master something. And they're expressing and using this material in fresh ways that hadn't been seen before. So, but their concept and their ideas have been matured for tens of thousands of hours often. And for them to bring this sort of creative maturity from a different medium into clay is, they're maybe not fluent, and that's what attracts them with it. And that roughness of it, of speaking that language, is what makes some of the work, potentially so incredible.
I mean, repetition for me is important, like for me as an artist, but I don't think repetition, I think it's depending on the artist, I think, too. For me, it is important. As you can see my work, although I'm not throwing right now, my lines are repetition still. And I think, and I've been throwing for like 10 years as well. So that habit also kind of led me to do what I'm doing right now. But I think it's not necessarily important for everyone, I believe. But it is, I think it's a choice by the artist also. If they want, if they feel that repetition is important, then it should be important. But it shouldn't be something you have to do all the time. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.